Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Alan Diehl. I currently serve on the board of the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, and I'm also the vice president of the Humanists of Lynn County. On this morning's show, we're going to be trying to answer the question, is the world becoming a better place? Now, here to discuss this question with me, I have two distinguished guests. And if you could just take a second to tell us about what you do and introduce yourself.
My name is Ayman Amer. I teach economics and statistics at Mount Mercy University.
Good morning. My name is Scott Samuelson. I'm a professor of philosophy at Kirkwood Community College on the Iowa City campus. I have a special interest in this topic of suffering. I actually have a new book coming out pretty soon about suffering. And so this question of suffering, dealing with it, making the world a better place, these are right up my alley. I look forward to getting into our conversation.
Excellent, and I'm hoping with just the two panelists on this morning, we'll be able to kind of dive deeper into this issue. To give it a little context, a few weeks ago, I had purchased a book on Amazon by a Harvard professor by the name of Steven Pinker. The name of the book is Enlightenment Now. Steven Pinker had written a book in 2011 called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which was basically an argument for the fact that although most people perceive the world as becoming a more violent place, that actually the world is not becoming a more violent place, that violence is being reduced. And so he followed that book up with this one called Enlightenment Now, the Case for Reason, Science, and Human Progress. And he makes the argument that, in fact, the world is becoming a better place in most every statistical category. Now I know, Ayman, you are a quote-unquote statistician. You teach at Mount Mercy. Obviously, this is near and dear to your heart. But I do want to start out the conversation here this morning with just the very simple question of, is the world becoming a better place? And Ayman, I'd like to start with you on that.
I think it's obviously, when you probably talk to people, and when you talk to people, it's a very difficult question. Some people will answer it as if it is a simple question. I don't think it lends itself to statistics and data. I mean, everything in our life is statistics and data. And I believe sometimes we give it, which I shouldn't say that, we give it more importance than it should take in our life, because some of it is misleading, and some variables in our economy or in our social life are very qualitative and very difficult to measure. And I think the question in itself, as Steven Pinker put it, is very difficult to answer. It's not something you can grasp.
Yeah, it is a difficult question. In leading up to this, over the last probably week or so, I've had multiple conversations with groups of people, individuals, and just kind of posing this question to them. And it is kind of it's a very simple question, right? There's not a lot of words, not a lot of syllables, nothing. But it is very complex. And what I found is it really does invoke a lot of emotions, an emotional response from people. And to be quite honest with you, the majority of the people, when I asked them this question, said, no, the world is not getting better, right? Things are far worse today than they were, let's say, when I was a child or years ago. So that was at least the perception I'm getting as I've talked to people. Scott, what's your opinion about that question?
Well, as a philosopher, I'm going to hedge a bit, but I guess my answer is yes and no. That I think that Pinker makes a strong case that there are certainly ways in which things are much better than they have been. One way I guess I think of it is, would I want to trade places with a 13th century peasant, or for that matter, a 19th century settler? And I would say, no, actually, I don't think I do. I think in that regard, things have gotten better on many fronts. Though I think there's been a big price for some of that progress, and there comes some downsides. I think that sometimes we've made progress at the expense of a sense of meaning in our lives, that sometimes perhaps things are better by the measurements, but not necessarily, they don't feel more meaningful. In fact, we might feel lonelier or more meaningless or more at sea. We might feel more alienated from our situation. And I also think that progress can sometimes lead to some real dangers. You know, Pinker talks about the power of reason and science, and for sure, I mean, think of all the wonderful triumphs that have happened because of that, but also think of things like nuclear warfare, global warming. Now, maybe we've overall gained, but those things put in peril our lives and can freak us out about what, you know, could happen with this great power that we've amassed for ourselves, and that too is a little frightening.
I think if Pinker measured, so we have Einstein and we have nuclear energy, and that is great for our civilization. However, there are piles of nuclear weapons or missiles enough to destroy the world many times over. So therefore, the point is we don't know how big that risk is. I mean, yes, we use nuclear power as we speak now, this minute, this place, this minute. However, we don't know how high the risk is, but there is a very high risk.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that's, in fact, I'm taking your statistics class at Mount Mercy currently, and we're reading a book called The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, and he argues that very point, right? That, you know, there is this, I think the subtitle of the book is the high impact of improbable events, right? And the fact that, yeah, we see all of these wonderful conveniences, we have this modern technology, we do have this relative peace in the world, but yet at what cost, right? And could that be taken away tomorrow? Could there be a nuclear war? But I think with this question, you know, to really focus our conversation, you know, it is asking, can we really look at the world and can we empirically measure, right, the fact that are things getting better? Not are things perfect,
no,
but are they measurably getting better? And I think, you know, he points out a few things in the book. He talks about how life expectancy, for instance, is increasing measurably, right, over the last 100 years, and certainly over the last 500 years.
Right.
Access to health and health technologies, wealth, the ability to, one of the interesting things he points out is talking about a refrigerator, right? And how you can go out for $500 and purchase a brand new refrigerator. But the question is, how much would you pay for a refrigerator, right? Because we value refrigeration so much. You know, the fact that would you pay $10,000? Would you pay $20,000? Most people would. But we have the luxury of being able to go out and spend, you know, really pennies for something that is a major convenience. So, he argues for these different points, but. So, I mean, what are your thoughts when it comes to the actual measurements when you look at some of the things I mentioned?
The quality of life is very difficult to measure. People live longer, true. Are people happier? I'm not sure. It depends on where you are. Are you in Syria? Are you in Bangladesh? Are you in New York? Are you in Marion, Iowa? The answer, I'm almost certain, will differ depending on where you are, which is very simple, geographical location. That means your political and economic and social environment that you live in.
Right.
This is very difficult. It's like looking at the same view from different angles, and different people will see it differently. People will see it from their own personality, personal point of view, how their life is, social relations, family, grandmom, grandmother, grandfather, husband, wife, children. All of that is important, and all of that is very difficult to measure. And we can say the world is a better place, but we can say also the world is not a better place. I mean to say, I am not taking either side. I'm just warning against the idea that everything is fine. Everything is not fine, and there's a lot of work to be done.
Right. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say something about, you know, what I think Pinker's project is in some sense, and, you know, he calls his book Enlightenment Now.
Right.
And the way I'm going to over schematize things a bit, but for a considerable amount of time in Europe, and I suppose in other parts of the world too, there was a kind of sense in which there was just a divine order to things. Things were just as they were,
Right.
and they were going to pretty much stay even, right? So, like, let's say there was smallpox in the world. You say, well, this is just the way it is. You come to terms with it, you accept it, maybe you hope for a better world in the afterlife, whatever. There was a movement that happened starting about the 18th century, which Pinker is trying to celebrate at some level, the Enlightenment,
Right.
where people really felt as if we didn't have to just accept things as they were, as part of the divine order. That in fact, if we put our minds to it, we could understand the world in a better way, and by understanding the world in a better way, we could potentially use technology or politics to improve the world.
Right.
That's right.
And that has been a pretty great legacy in some sense. And that, like I said, that's the part that he's really celebrating in this regard. So like with something like smallpox, we don't take it for granted that smallpox is in the world, and most of us, I think, are grateful. I don't think any of us, if we could reintroduce smallpox, because we think, well, they had a better time of it back then, so let's reintroduce. No one would say that. We'd say, thank goodness smallpox is gone. That seems to me to be clear-cut kind of an improvement in some sense, and it's that legacy of saying, let's use our minds, understand things in order to try to improve them. However, I have a skeptical side too, maybe like Ayman, that those very things, people got very high on the possibility of progress. There have been times in which that optimism has come crashing down. In the 20th century, it happened a couple times where, with World War I, with World War II, all of a sudden the powers of technology seem to be used against us. And it would be very difficult to imagine going to, say, Japan right after the dropping of the bomb and say, well, would you say the world's a better or a worse place? Or to go to Germany after the Holocaust and say, well, would you say, or to go to Syria right now and say, chemicals making our life a better place, right? Well, sure, there's some chemical weapons here and there, but better overall. It's hard to feel that kind of sense of progress when the very tools we made to make the world a better place become turned against us. Now, I'm still, like Pinker, want to say I think the Enlightenment is something worth celebrating and worth trying to continue, but I also think we have to be very careful about understanding the limits of what we can do. And having, I worry about that sometimes Pinker gets a little too optimistic, and that we have to be aware of that the very tools we have that could make things better could actually, at times, make our lives worse and potentially imperil us in a very, very serious way.
So it's this cautious optimism, right? This idea that, yes, we have solved problems in the past, and those problems, in any problems we presented with today, there's a solution to those problems, but we have to count the cost, right? So in solving that problem, are we creating a greater one? And I don't know, unless you have a crystal ball, there's maybe not a perfect way to make that happen, to identify what those kind of unforeseen consequences are. But to get back to your point, Ayman, about this idea of, we have more things, right? We have more luxuries. We have the ability to instantly communicate with somebody across the planet. You had mentioned the war in Syria, and on the other hand, there's 240 some countries that are not at war, right? There is relative peace in the world. But the question becomes, are we happier? And you just kind of briefly mentioned that. Do you think that we're happier? Pinker says that statistically we're not happier. We're pretty much just maintaining our happiness level across, in spite of all these other luxuries we have.
There is a lot of questions about this. I would be reluctant to make a conclusion. I want people to pay attention to the points of weakness and the points of activism. That you need to be active to construct this political, social, economic order, to avoid the injustices that exist, to avoid the war. Technology is great. I was going to say, when you mentioned the American culture, I think has a strain of optimism which sometimes works against it. In the 1990s, for example, it's the glorious decade, as economists call it. 1991 to about 2000, 2001. Every company would have a spiritual, inspirational speaker, and they would say, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And people were buying that dream.
Right.
And when they did overbuy the dream, it crashed in the Great Depression, recession, 2008. And so the 10 years, the outcomes were not felt for a long time, 18 years to say, or 10 or 15 years. Technology is great. We can communicate, you and me, by text or by my Facebook or by YouTube. And I'm not sure. This is a neutral technology. It could be very good or otherwise. It could be people are not talking face to face to their cousins and their uncles and grandfather and grandmother, or mom or dad, or my person next to my office. This is not good. We used to play in the neighborhood. The kids play baseball and football and soccer in the street. I don't think that's happening as much as it did. So there is quantity. I don't think there is quality. There is longer life. The other example, so social network, technological network could take us from each other in the same time that it could bring us closer. So therefore, it's neutral. I don't know if it is progress or not. If the nuclear power destroyed our world, then my judgment would be, if Steven Pinker lived in Bangladesh, he wouldn't write this book, I don't think. I do not think so.
And I mean, again, you definitely make a good point that, there are people in the world, there are civilizations in the world that are struggling currently, right? And I think his premise is, his point is not to ignore those, right? But to push all resources to that, solving that problem as much as we can, and to kind of elevate the standard of living and the happiness level, if you will, of all humanity. But what he's trying to do is aggregately kind of look at things and say, can we make a case for the fact that things are getting better? So should we celebrate that? But I did want to kind of pivot a little bit and talk about this phenomena of, when I mention this to people, it seems like the typical reaction is, no, the world is getting worse. It's certainly worse off than when I was younger. Why do you think that tends to be people's perception? I mean,
I think it's probably a variety of things. One thing is, I think probably is just that it's in human nature a bit, particularly as we get older, to feel as if the world's getting worse. In part because the world that we formed our identity in is shifting in many different ways, and we feel increasingly alienated from that world. I always think of, like, even now, I don't think of myself as that old, but even now, like, sometimes my kids are listening to music, I'm like, what is that noise you're listening to? And to my ears, I would say music is getting worse. There's no doubt about it. Music has just gotten worse.
And every generation says.
But every generation. I mean, I understand that this isn't necessarily some objective statement about the good of music overall, but it is more an expression of my own experience of a world that is changing, maybe for good, maybe for bad, maybe going one way or the other. But either way, it feels alienating a bit to me as I go along with things. And so I think in that sense, it's going to always be natural to say the good old days. Back in the day, those were the days.
I think part of it is the media. I mean, without interrupting. But the media. Absolutely, and I guess they teach that. I don't know if they do teach that, but the negative news gets
what bleeds leads, right?
Exactly. So I mean, the media is a big deal. We are surrounded by media, whether it's on the internet or on TV or cable or anything. The media catches on the negative things, and that's a big part of our perception of the world. And
there does seem to be in the media itself, and just in our world itself, and maybe we all feel this up to a point. I've noticed this kind of growing trend of people who seem to very viscerally reject, you might say, Steven Pinker's point that things are better. It seems like there are a number of people. I like to call them exiteers. After there's the Brexit and the Brexiteers, but there are any number of people taking all sorts from different ideologies or whatever who feel like they want out. That they somehow want out of this system that maybe everyone is saying is making things better, but they feel increasingly alienated from it and they want out. Now,
Meaning out what? They want to get...
well, it can take all sorts of forms, right? I mean, it could be that I want to get out of the global economy. It could be that I want out of the EU. It might mean
Off
that
of Facebook.
I want to get off of Facebook.
Yeah.
I want to be off the grid.
Yeah.
I mean, terrorism, I suppose, is a very destructive
way
form
out.
of this.
Right.
I'm going to kill myself, but
That's
take
right.
out people with me.
Yeah.
Or mass shooters who
Yeah.
say, I'm so sick of this, I want out, I'm willing to kill myself and go out with a bang. But even people who just feel like the world's gotten too crazy, I need to retreat, or I suppose, there's right-wing versions of it and left-wing versions of it, but it does seem to be that there is this kind of movement, and for that matter, there's an opioid epidemic where
Right.
people feel as if they just are going to check out, so to speak, literally, or in terms of their consciousness. People feel anxious and depressed, and so you have all these things where people feel a little at odds with their environment, and even if you would say to them, well, but infant mortality is down, and whatever, this is up, they feel this sense that some sense of meaning has not been
But it's
I
not-
want to pick up real quick on what you're saying here, because I think you're touching on something interesting. There's a quote that I found by Voltaire, and it said, "Man was born to live either in the convulsions of misery or in the lethargy of boredom."
Right.
And
Right, there you go.
I mean, I thought about that quote, and I thought, that's interesting, right? Like, but when I evaluate my own life, I find like, I kind of fluctuate between these states of happiness, misery, boredom, contentment, right? Like, this is just what I feel almost throughout the day. So, this gets back to what you're saying. As we progress as a society and maybe get away from, let's say, working with our hands, or we're becoming more isolated because of these technologies, I mean, is there an inevitable kind of shift towards boredom, and is that the future of humanity? Is there a way to have these better our society but also maintain that quality of life?
I don't want to be having to choose between the two choices that Scott offered. I don't think so. I think yes, a lot of the people are miserable, and a lot of things have no control. A lot of people have no control over what's going on with them. Housing, the inner cities here, Syria there, over there, Bangladesh, with the water rises with the waves, with the melting of the ice. Now, a lot of people have no control, but that's not the attitude that I want to get out of it. It's neither the misery, nor I want to get out from this, nor I will be bored, because I will always be working. And there is something about this, that reason and science have taken the place of a spiritual, social environment that he does not mention, or almost does not mention. Spiritual, social, there is something in this world bigger than me, bigger than my interest. I would like to be part of it.
Yes.
I would like to promote justice. I would like to promote peace. I would like to promote fairness. I would like to promote workers getting fair wages. I would like to promote equality between men and women. All of this is neither misery, nor it is giving up, nor it is boredom.
Right.
There's a lot of work to do. That's what I mean. There's a lot of work to do.
And this is where I guess I think that we have to be thoughtful about even suffering itself. That I always try to argue that suffering is a kind of mystery. It's not just a problem. I mean, one way of looking at it is just that we just need to solve it. Like here's a problem that needs to be solved. And certainly at times that does seem good. Like if I have a headache, it does seem nice that I want to solve that problem, or I would like to get rid of the headache. But I don't know that all suffering should be solved in a sense, or we shouldn't always have that attitude towards it. Comfort is good up to a point, but we also want adventure in our lives. As you said, we want to be a part of something bigger. And like I know all sorts of people who do things like go rock climbing, right? Well, that's not very smart in terms of if you want to just keep from breaking a limb or dying. But without that in their life, they've lost
beautiful.
Something. It's something that's powerful to them, and it makes them feel part of something bigger. It's challenging them, and they have to open themselves up at some level to suffering. Now, that's not to say they're trying to suffer or they're trying to inflict suffering. Those would be bad things, but that ability to say, look, yes, I want to solve some suffering, but I also need to be open to some risk in order to have a kind of meaningful, exciting life. Now, some people maybe comfort's all they want, but I think most of us want something more than that.
I do think that our education system can very much promote that attitude. Because I think data and statistics, and some people call it scientism or empiricism, things that look like science or data that are empirical, but it's really misleading. It's misleading. So that happens. So I want our education system, if we can say something here to be done actually, is that it promotes about finding the truth through philosophy and logic, through reason, through discovery. People go out in the desert and out in space and learn, and this is fantastic. This is great. Science, we are not I am not against science. I'm not against data or statistics, but I'm just trying to say that a person should have an active role in the place where they are in the world, in their family, in their community, in their country.
Right. And that there are some goods that are immeasurable
very
goods
much.
rather than
so
just measurable.
So that
goods.
attitude, I don't think it is served by kind of reason, science is God or something.
Yeah.
It is not.
So I mean, there's this natural state of discontent that a lot of us find ourselves in, right? I mean, even the wealthiest people on earth, you know, will probably attest to the fact that they may go throughout some of their day with just discontent, right? They're wanting to find something else, and that can be fulfilled with religion, that can be fulfilled with money, that can be filled with all kinds of things that people try, adventure, experiences, people try to, so I mean, that's the crux of it, right? I think we can look back and say, yeah, there are some measurable things that have gotten better in almost every aspect. Most of us, we don't appreciate it because we never lived 500 years ago and saw our, children die in infancy at the incredible rates that they died.
As we speak in other locations.
Yeah, right. So I mean, you're kind of limited by time and geography, right? But I'm just wondering from that is there a way for us to recognize that we're discontent, recognize that's the state we're in, but then also at the same time recognize the progress that has been made and that can be made in the future, and maybe that in and of itself can be some sort of contentment.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, I mean, this could probably be applied historically as you're suggesting, but I would just say in general, it's probably good to be as grateful as you can about the goods in your own life, but to be concerned about the suffering of others. Sometimes we do the opposite. We're concerned about our own suffering, and we're like, why can't they be more grateful? Generally, I would say it should be the other way around. We should be grateful for whatever we have, and we should still nonetheless be very attuned to the sufferings of others. And in that sense, I would say there's a lot that we have to be grateful for, and a lot the science and technology have given us to be grateful for. But at the same time, I want us to keep us alive to the very real suffering that is still there.
I think,
and we just have a minute or so left.
Yeah.
Scientifically speaking, or technologically speaking, we advanced very far. Look at Google, which again, and we keep remaking the point that Google and Facebook and otherwise are informing us, but on the other hand, they could be misleading us or taking us from each other. Technology and science have progressed so much. Human beings, not so much. I don't think so.
There's a lot of problems to still solve. One of the things, and we'll end here, but one of the things he points out is what's called the optimism gap, and that is that most people, if you ask them if their life is getting better, they will say yes. But if you ask them about other people's lives, are they getting better? Or society, they'll say no. And that's an interesting, interesting bit of human psyche. But again, I appreciate you joining us this morning. I hope you enjoyed our talk, and will join us again next week. Take care now. Bye.